Hi everyone, it's Lindsay and welcome back to another video. Today I have 3 different tags to share with you. They're all using the same stamp set and these are back to school, like thank you teacher tags. So I'll be using this teacher clear stamp set from Joy Claire Stamps. It is fantastic. It's got all these great sentiments in it. They're very punny, so I'm going to be using those today to create all of my tags. The first one I'm starting off with is actually going to be a shape tag. So it used to be called punch art, but I'm not using punches here. I'm using dies. So I'll go ahead and start off by die cutting 2 zigzag circle dies from white cardstock, and I also cut the same circle die from some blue cardstock, a light blue. And from that blue, I'm going to go ahead and just use my craft knife to cut like a wonky circle inside the stitched lines. That is going to be my icing. This is going to be turned into a cookie. So once I have that done, it's time to start getting some sponging or some ink blending on these die cuts to make them look a little bit more realistic and give them some depth and some color. So on my white cardstock, one of the circles, I'm going to go ahead and sponge on some vintage photo just around the edges. The center is going to be covered so you don't have to color it at all. But just adding this little bit of color to that white really helps give it more of a cookie look. Then, to give the icing a little bit more depth, I'm going to come around the edges with some evergreen bow. Now you can see I used my mini ink blending tool on the first part sponging. That was mostly going to be covered up, so I didn't worry about the look. On this, I actually switched over to my Amazon makeup brushes. These work better blending for me. They give me a softer look. I tried to blend with my ink blending tools and I've forgotten how. I had horrible lines, so I just flipped this over and did the other side with my Amazon makeup brushes, and that worked out really well. So in order to do a little bit of stamping on the back of this circle, which is where my sentiment is going to go, I went ahead and die cut 2 of those white circles. I'll glue those together, that way I have a nice clean back. I don't have any of those little marks that you get when you die cut from your cutting plates. And I can just go ahead and stamp my sentiment on a nice flat surface. So gluing 2 together really helps out. Then once I've glued them together, I'm going to go ahead and punch a hole in the top so I know where my top of my tag is, and then I'll stamp on the back before I do anything more. So from that sentiment set, there is this sentiment that says you are, or you made me one smart cookie. Thanks for making me one smart cookie, I believe. And I'll stamp that down on the back with some pine cone ink from Versifying Claire. And because it says one smart cookie, that's why we're making this tag look like a cookie. Now, if you don't want to make it look like this cookie, you can always do a chocolate chip and just do a circle and do maybe some brown dots on it, like some brown hole punches on there. Really simple and easy to do that too. There's a closer look at that sentiment on the back. I put it closer to the top so you can have a little bit of space underneath to sign your name. And then we'll flip it back over and we'll start on the front again. So I'm going to go ahead and put my icing on my cookie. I'm attaching that with foam tape to give it a little bit of dimension. Then I'm going to add these white sprinkles. These are from Cat Scrappiness. These are so much fun. I have these in white, brown, and I think rainbow. And they're so much fun to put on. It does take a little bit of time, but what I do is I just put down some drops of Nouveau Deluxe. You can use whatever liquid adhesive you like best. Then I use my tweezers and just place those little sprinkles right in each dot. Another way to do this is just put dots of glue down, shake on some of those sprinkles, and then flip it over. Whatever falls off is not going to stick because it didn't get attached to the glue. However, whatever sticks should stay with the glue. Just give it a good press with your hand. I put mine on individually because I didn't mind doing this, but once it dries, the glue dries clear, and there I've got my nice sprinkled cookie all ready to go. I added a little bit of twine at the top, and that tag was finished. So on to my second tag. For this one, I'm actually going to go ahead and make my own tag, and I'll show you how I did that. I started off with a piece of 3, and I'll cut it down here in just a moment, but this is 3 inches wide, so right in the center I'm going to go to 1.5 inches and mark that out, and then I'll go ahead and very quickly trim this down. I'm going to trim it down to 4.5 inches, so my tag will be 3 inches across by 4.5 inches tall. Now once I get that trimmed down, I'm going to go ahead and put this back on my cutting mat where I'm using as a ruler right now. I'll come down about 1.5 inches and place a mark on both sides of the tag. Now I've got a mark on both sides and the top, and then I'll go ahead and my paper trimmer line up the top mark and one of the sides. You'll have a little triangle off to your right hand side, and then you can just cut that off. That's going to create this nice tag top. It's going to be nice and even, symmetrical. It works out really well to do it this way. That way I don't have to buy a bunch of tags. I can just make them myself. So once I had that created, I'm going to go ahead and start ink blending on this tag. Now this is from white cardstock, and I'm going to go ahead and ink blend with some evergreen bough. I'm using a stencil, it's a homemade stencil from a die that I have on hand. It's just a cloud border die. If you don't have a cloud border, you can always just use cloud dies and stack them on top of one another too, and that will give you the same look. I start at the bottom and work my way up and just ink blend very, very lightly towards the edge of the clouds. Here down at the bottom, I felt like I didn't have enough, so I went back and darkened it up a little bit. Then I'll finish it off with one at the very top, and I've got my cloudy background ready to go. For this tag, I'll be using the Thanks for Being a Great Teacher. Being is spelled B-E-E-I-N-G. So it's got a great little pun in there, and it's got a B off to the right-hand side. I'll go ahead and stamp that down in the lower left-hand corner of my tag using my Misty. I'll give it a couple of stamps to make sure I've got that blue ink in the background covered up. And I'm going to, while I still have this in my Misty, stamp it down on some scratch paper as well. I don't need the whole thing, I just need that little bee image because I'll be coloring him and cutting him out in just a moment. But once I had that stamped down, then I went ahead and did color him. I used some memento markers for that, and I fussy cut him by hand very, very quickly. I added some foam tape on the back, and I'll pop that up over the little stamped image. That just gives him some color, gives it dimension, adds a little something more to the tag. But that is super duper simple to do with any of your sentiments that you have. If you have an image in there, you can always stamp it separately on a scrap piece of paper, color it in, cut it out, and layer it up. It's a lot of fun, and it adds a lot of interest. Then to add even more interest to this tag, I went ahead and cut some cloud dies. This is the Lawn Fawn Puffy Clouds, I believe, and I cut those from the Deco Foil Flock Sheets in the White Latte. And I'm popping those up with some foam tape as well, just around the tag too. This one is super simple. It took me no time at all to make, but I love the way it turned out. Now this would be a fun one to attach to like some Burt's Bees chapstick or something like that. Maybe like a jar of honey. If you have a local farmer's market, that would be really fun too. A lot of really fun things you can do with all of these puns that are going on these tags. And again, I just added twine to the top to finish off this tag so you can tie it on to whatever gift you're giving. Now this third one is super easy as well. I'm going to do a little bit of coloring. So I made my tag the same way I did beforehand. So I've got my homemade tag, and on that I'm going to stamp the You Make Learning Fun sentiment. I use VersaFine Clear Nocturne ink, so I got a nice crisp dark image. I stamped that on the tag, and I'm also stamping it on a piece of masking paper, label paper. I'll leave what I use linked down below. But once I had that stamped on the masking paper, I'm going to go ahead and cut it out, leaving a border around it. Then I'll use that as a mask to stamp around this and add my background. I'll be using the apple from the stamp set. I love this image, and I have a thing about apples. I like apples. They're not my favorite fruit, but I love coloring them for some reason. I don't know why. So I'm going to go ahead and stamp a bunch of these and color these in. I'm using Memento Tuxedo black ink for this, so I can color them in with my alcohol markers. You can color these in however you want. This would be really pretty using some OMS and your colored pencils as well. Even stamping this on watercolor paper and doing a watercolor tag would be fun too. Just make sure that whatever ink or whatever coloring medium you do decide to use, you use a black ink that's going to play nicely with it. So once I have that all stamped out, it's time to remove that mask and start coloring. This is one of my favorite techniques to do. It's so simple just to mask off your sentiment and stamp around it, but it leaves this great little border that highlights your sentiment too. I'll go ahead and peel this up. This masking paper or label paper does stick a little bit more, so I was very careful in peeling it up, but no harm was done, and then it was time to color. I'm not going to show you all the coloring. I'll show you one image because they're all colored the exact same way. And again, this is kind of user subjected too with alcohol markers. You may use your alcohol markers completely different than I use mine. What I like to do is start with my lightest color and I put a layer of that down onto my image. Then I come in with my medium color and I go in and add a little bit of shadow to wherever I want it. Now I'm using a medium red here. I started with the very light one, went to a medium one, and I'm using my Dick Blick Studio brush markers for this. Use whatever alcohol markers you have on hand. Finally, I come in with my darkest, add that in where I want it the darkest. Then I start blending with my medium shade once again. Finally, I'll come back in with my lightest and finish off blending out the entire image, giving everything one final layer. That is the easiest way for me to color. You do need to be careful when doing it this way because if your markers bleed very easily or you have a color that bleeds very easily, adding in like I'm doing 6 layers essentially, it can start to bleed on you. So just let it dry in between layers if you feel like it's getting oversaturated. Now for my leaves, I'm doing the exact same thing. I come in with my lighter color, go in with my darker color, and finally blend out with my lighter. For this smaller image, I only used 2 colors. I didn't find it necessary to go in with 3. There's a closer look at all the images colored in and one final look at the tag as well. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and all 3 tags that I made. If you have any questions, about supplies, they're all going to be listed down in the description box below. That is going to do it for me today. Thank you guys so much for watching and happy crafting.